Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for coming. Today I have a pretty big book haul, or at least big for me, and I spent an hour and a half in the bookstore, and I could have very well spent a lot more time than that, but I had some other stuff to do, so I did have to get going. But that video was in my last post, which was the reading vlog, where I also showed a recipe for some homemade pizza that I did. So if you want to check that out, I will leave a link somewhere. And then today I had a pretty stressful doctor's appointment, and after that I decided to treat myself by going back to the bookstore. And I have this thing where I will have like 40 books on my list in my phone of books that I really want to read, books that I want to get to or check out, and then I get to the bookstore and I forget every book I've ever wanted to get. And it's like the same thing that happens with actually reading books, and I pick up a book and everything about having read it just has flown out of my brain. So I walked around just aimlessly a little bit today, and I chose one book that I wanted to get, went over to the section, and they didn't have it, and I don't know how they didn't have it. It was Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, and they didn't have. How do you not have Anna Karenina? I don't know. Anyway, so just picked up a couple other books. So I have 3 shopping trips that I ended up just leaving in the packaging on my shelves, and I kind of sort of forgot what I bought. And so when I went in today, I almost grabbed a book and I had to stop myself, and I was thinking, did I already purchase that? I feel like I maybe just bought it and I already forgot. So I didn't get that. I got a couple ones that I'd never really heard of before instead. So today you are going to discover with me what I purchased, because I already don't remember. So this is going to be fun. There's not a ton, but let's get into it. Okay, so I have my first package here, and I have my box cutter. And most people, I was going to say most people wouldn't believe this. Most people who know me would believe this. I am an expert at the box cutter. It's a weird thing to say. Most people who know me, I'm an expert box cutter. Okay, so the first book we have is Address Unknown, a novel from Katherine Cressman Taylor. So the reason that I got this was because I was looking through the website's listing of what books qualified for a buy one get one half off, and this was one of the books, and I was reading the descriptions on books that I hadn't heard of before. Aside from the books that I already knew about, most of them are classic literature, and so I kind of knew what they were about. I knew whether I wanted them or not, but this one I had not heard of. In this searing novel, Katherine Cressman Taylor brings vividly to life the insidious spread of Nazism through a series of letters between Max, a Jewish art dealer in San Francisco, and Martin, his friend and former business partner who was returned to Germany in 1932, just as Hitler is coming to power. Originally published in Story magazine in 1938, Address Unknown became an international sensation. Credited with revealing the dangers of Nazism to American readers early on, it is also a scathing indictment of fascist movements around the world and a harrowing expose of the power of the pen as a weapon. Haunting and eloquent, Address Unknown remains painfully relevant today. So you can tell this is incredibly short, but this absolutely fascinated me when I read this, because I have studied a lot about World War II, specifically as it relates to Nazi Germany, how the Nazis treated people, not only the Jews, but other groups of people that they felt should be exterminated. And I've been to the Holocaust Museum in my local area. I really would love to visit the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I don't think I'll ever get the chance to actually go to Auschwitz, but if I did, I would jump at the opportunity. I think it is such an important part of history, and you know, the old maxim of history repeats itself, and especially if you choose to forget it, if you choose to ignore it. And so I have read a lot of novels and a lot of life stories of people who had survived Nazi Germany. And so this one did intrigue me. sometimes it can be exhausting. It can be emotionally and mentally exhausting to read that kind of, it's not fiction. So even if it's a fictionalized story, so much of it is true and so much of it somebody went through. And so it can be very, very difficult to read. So lately, even though it's something that I know that I don't want to use the word enjoy, but that means a lot to me to read about, it can be too much. And so that's why this intrigued me, because the format of this is very different than anything I've read. I don't typically like first person. I don't typically go for something that's like formatted as a diary or letters between people. But something about this really, really intrigued me in letters between people who are clearly on opposite sides of an absolutely black and white issue, and to see I'm interested to see what attempts at gray area are made. And I like the line about the harrowing expose of the power of the pen as a weapon. And it can be a weapon to fight against something. It can be a weapon to defend against something. And I have a feeling that that is going to be featured in both sides of the story. So the fact that it was a little bit on the smaller side, actually kind of made me go for it. Even though it's a lot shorter than a lot of the things I read, this sounded very intriguing. So I'm actually very excited to pick this up and see what I think about it. So that is my first one. Okay, and then we have this box is going to fall over, and it's going to take the phone with it, I can tell. Okay, here we go. Oh, okay, so I got the I got the 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I have heard a little bit about this, not so much about the book. I've heard the name of the book referenced quite a few times. So this was one that I was reading the description of because I couldn't really place it in my memory banks as ever having learned what the plot was, but I've heard so much about this that so many people really like it. Evelyn Hardcastle will die every day until Aidan Bishop can identify her killer and break the cycle. But every time the day begins again, Aidan wakes up in the body of a different guest, and some of his hosts are more helpful than others. So, I mean, how can you not want to read it just from that description? So you've got a murder mystery. You have somebody who's stuck in a time loop, reliving their own murder. Awesome. Then you have somebody trying to solve the murder who is reliving the time loop as well. Okay, cool. And then the thing that absolutely sold me on this was the quantum leap. So if people are too young to remember this, Scott Bakula. So if people are too young to know who Scott Bakula is, basically, he's an actor. And there was a show, I want to say in the late 80s, possibly early 90s, but I think it was the late 80s, called Quantum Leap. Scott Bakula was the main star of the show, and he was in part of a science project. This is going to be explained very, very badly. He's part of a project, secret government project, I believe, where he was supposed to be time traveling, I think. But what ended up happening is he ended up traveling not only through time, but into somebody else's shoes. Like literally, he would wake up, he would look in the mirror, and he might be an 80-year-old white woman from Maine. He might be a 12-year-old black boy from Mississippi. He might be a 40-year-old Chinese man from California. He would never know. And his goal was eventually to leap home, or to, along the way, figure out what the heck happened and how he can get home. And he could be in a different time period, he could be anywhere, he could become anyone. And of course, every single episode then he had to fix the person's problems as best he could. And, you know, it gave you insight into the life of another person and a day in the life of, you know, not more than just a day, but, you know, walking in their shoes. It was a really cool show. I really liked it. And so when I find out that the person solving the mystery is stuck in a loop, but waking up as a different guest every single time, oh my gosh, this just sounds so intriguing. So I'm really, really hoping that this is a good one. And can we talk about that cover? Look at that. That is beautiful. This is gonna look really nice on my bookshelf. So I'm super excited about this. Okay, what do we have next? We have, let's go for the pink one. And the pink one is No Longer Human. I'm not kidding. My surprise is real. I literally forgot what I purchased. This I have heard about in a number of places. I want to say one of the places that I saw this was a channel that I've mentioned here before, which is Emmy, that she has read this and she really liked it, and I don't remember specifically what it's about, but I remember being intrigued by it at the time. So when this came up on the buy one get one half off, I was pretty excited. So the blurb on the back then describes this as, "Mine has been a life of much shame. I can't even guess myself what it must be to live the life of a human being." Portraying himself as a failure, the protagonist of Osamu Dazai's, I am butchering that name probably, it's probably Osamu Dazai's No Longer Human, narrates a seemingly normal life, even while he feels himself incapable of understanding human beings. Oba Yozu's attempt to reconcile himself to the world around him begin in early childhood, continue through high school, where he becomes a clown to mask his alienation, and eventually lead to a failed suicide attempt as an adult. Without sentimentality, he records the casual cruelties of life and its fleeting moments of human connections and tenderness. Semi-autobiographical, No Longer Human is the final completed work of one of Japan's most important writers, Osamu Dazai. I did not realize he was Japanese. Now I know how to pronounce it. Osamu Dazai, 1909 to 1948. The novel has come to echo the sentiments of youth, from post-war Japan to the postmodern society and technology. Still, one of the 10 best-selling books in Japan, No Longer Human is a powerful exploration of an individual's alienation from society. So this was different than the blurb that I read on the website. It had a very short condensed version of this, so I did not realize that this was actually from a Japanese author, and somehow that name did not strike me as particularly Japanese, which is weird because it gives me now, it's a powerful exploration of an individual's alienation from society. So that actually adds another layer of this to me, for me, because I know in Japan, I've had professors in the past and people who have lived in Japan, especially native Japanese, have told me that there is such a disconnecting of yourself and a separation of yourself when in a highly populated area like Japan. You know, a lot of people will ask them, how can you have so many people living in such close quarters? How can you have such tiny living spaces and so many people, you know, in these huge high rises jammed on top of each other, no privacy, you know, shoji walls where everybody in the house can hear what's going on. And it's been described to me multiple times as there's a conscious disconnect where in polite society, you have to give other people privacy, and that almost means turning a part of your brain off to not hearing, not listening, not processing what you're hearing and seeing that is technically outside of your little sphere. And so this is basically, to me, it sounds like it's taking that, you know, up 10 levels, even beyond the point of being in your own control and completely disconnecting from yourself in the end. So this is going to be really, really interesting. I'm looking forward to, this feels like a deep one, so I'm definitely going to have to be in a mental space ready for this, and I am definitely not. I am busy and I am stressed, so I'm looking to have just something light, but when I get to this, I am very excited to start. All right, so the last one from this box is Emma by Jane Austen. And this one I've almost bought in the store multiple times. This is, if you've seen my, oh my gosh, I think it was my very first video. I had read Pride and Prejudice, and I had sworn my whole life I was never gonna read Jane Austen. Finally, I read Jane Austen, I read Pride and Prejudice, and I absolutely loved it. And so now I wanna read more of Jane Austen's works, and I just, look, that cover is so pleasing. It is so pretty. And it's like velvety, buttery, suede soft. Oh my gosh, I just love it. I am a little bit nervous about this because I have heard from people who I think probably have pretty similar book tastes to mine. I've heard that Emma is okay, but it can be a little bit boring at times, and it's not as good as Pride and Prejudice, which I feel like maybe I got in trouble because I started with maybe her best work, and now I'm gonna read the others and be disappointed, so I'm hoping that doesn't happen. But eventually I will be diving into Emma by Jane Austen. So that's it for the books that I ordered that day. But I do have one from Amazon. And okay, so this is a workbook. This is not the actual book. This is a workbook. This is The Body Keeps the Score and the workbook that goes along with it. I have no idea what the workbook is about. I don't know what it's got inside of it. However, The Body Keeps the Score is one of the best books I've ever read in my life, and it's one of the books that I've talked about previously where I said I wanted to do an entire video on just this one book because it's written by a doctor about how your body is rewired because of how your brain gets rewired from trauma, and that can be any kind of trauma. And it was absolutely fascinating. I own multiple copies because I became so obsessed with this book, and as I read it, I started seeing multiple people from my life that I know and I was seeing in the book. And so I bought new copies because I want to, one, have copies on hand in order to be able to share with people who I think would benefit from it. And two, I want to reread it with a specific person in mind each time and annotate it for that person. Not that I'm going to give it to them and say, oh my gosh, this is you, you have to read this, you have to do everything, but that's how I'm processing the information and applying it in real world scenarios. So I'm not going to get much deeper into it, but this is a companion that I found on Amazon, and I was fascinated by what the workbook could, how it could enhance the experience for somebody reading the original book as a part of trying to understand and heal from trauma. And actually, I have it right here. Nope. Yep. So those first two are my brand new copies. This guy is my annotated copy. And I also have this, I bought this as an ebook, and as I read this the first time through, I also had my ebook, I had my iPad next to me, and as I highlighted in here, I highlighted in my iPad so that I would literally never be anywhere without a copy of this book. That is how important I think this book is. And so you can see from all of the sticky notes, and then you can see all of the highlighting that I have done. So this is why I want to do an entire video on this book, but it is going to be a very serious video. There's probably going to be a number of trigger warnings, so I don't want to talk about it in like a regular wrap-up because I want to do something special specifically with this, but that's what this companion is now for. So I can now go through the companion, and I'll be able to use this and keep this in mind as I go through my other fresh copies for my own obsessive project now. So workbook for The Body Keeps the Score. That pile is going to fall. All right, so my next haul is from my first trip to the bookstore that I did post video of from my last blog. So let's do that one. Sorry it's so noisy. Clean that up later. So I have 4 books. All right, so let's start with Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I have heard so much recently about Daphne du Maurier. I've never heard of her until I joined BookTube, which I think is actually really interesting considering how much she's considered a classic author and her works are considered classics, and I cannot believe I'd never heard of her before. So I was in the section and I was like, where on earth would I find this author? And there in front of me was The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I don't know how you pronounce it. And boom, right next to him, my favorite author is the author I was looking for. So on the back, the blurb explains Rebecca as, "Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again." With these words, the reader is ushered into an isolated gray stone mansion on the windswept Cornish coast as the second Mrs. Maxim de Winter recalls the chilling events that transpired as she began her new life as the young bride of a husband she barely knew. For in every corner of every room were phantoms of a time dead but not forgotten, a past devotedly preserved by the sinister housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers, a sweet, immaculate, and untouched, clothing laid out and ready to be worn, but not by any of the great house's current occupants. With an eerie presentiment of evil tightening her heart, the second Mrs. De Winter walked in the shadow of her mysterious predecessor, determined to uncover the darkest secrets and shattering truths about Maxim's first wife, the late and hauntingly beautiful Rebecca. So the book that actually got me interested in Daphne du Maurier was, I think it's called My Cousin Rachel, but I didn't see that one, so I grabbed this one. I am happy that it is a special edition with more notes and information from the author. I don't really like the whole like, oh, hey, Netflix is making it into a movie, and I'm not a fan when a book becomes a movie or becomes a TV show, and then the book, which you could have found in print very easily up to that point, is all of a sudden flooded with the cover being images or an image from the film or from the TV show. I don't like that. Give me the original book cover. I'm probably not reading it because of the film or TV show, but even if I am reading it because I want to see what the source material was, and not because I want to picture exactly how it was in the film or in the TV show. So that the little thing bothers me a little bit, but it is what it is. I'm not going to make a big stink about it, but I do like the extra information from the author herself that is in here. So that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Next, oh, I forgot. Okay, so Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is the book I almost picked up today when I went to the bookstore, and I reached for it and I was like, I feel like maybe I just bought that. And I did. So I'm glad that I don't now have 2 copies of this. So this I've heard quite a lot about over the years, and I really like dystopian novels. A lot of the classic literature that I really like, I would consider some of my favorites are dystopian. And I like the twist of the books about utopia that end up, obviously, there is no such thing as utopia. It's always a dystopia just beneath the veneer. So this was one of the ones that I have heard people talk about and I have seen for a very long time, and I decided it was finally time to pick up for myself. And so I will read the back of it, which says, Aldous Huxley's tour de force, Brave New World, is a darkly satiric version of a utopian future, where humans are genetically bred and pharmaceutically anesthetized to passively serve a ruling order. A powerful work of speculative fiction that has enthralled and terrified readers for generations, it remains remarkably relevant to this day as both a warning to be heeded as we head into tomorrow, and as thought-provoking, satisfying entertainment. So this sounds right up my alley, and to me this would probably be light reading. There's a number of books that I would say are probably less light, but for me this is something that would be like a cozy curl up with a blanket and a cup of tea, and this would be relaxing to me. So that is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Next, I have When the Emperor Was Divine by Julie Otska. I have heard this novel's name, but I did not know what it was about, and I was meandering through looking at like David Mitchell's books, I believe is his name. I was looking at a number of books around it. I was looking at Haruki Murakami, and this little book caught my eye, and there was a second book next to it with the same author, and you could tell they were related because they had the same spine basically. And I read the back of both of them, and this being the author's first novel, I chose this one, but I really wanted to grab the other one too. But this one, I will read the back of it for you. On a sunny day in Berkeley, California in 1942, a woman sees a sign in a post office window, returns to her home, and matter-of-factly begins to pack her family's possessions. Like thousands of other Japanese Americans, they have been reclassified virtually overnight as enemy aliens and are about to be uprooted from their home and sent to a dusty internment camp in the Utah desert. In this lean and devastatingly evocative first novel, Julie Otska tells their story from 5 flawlessly realized points of view and conveys the exact emotional texture of their experience. The thin-walled barracks and barbed wire fences, the omnipresent fear and loneliness, the unheralded feats of heroism. When the Emperor Was Divine is a work of enormous power that makes a shameful episode of our history as immediate as today's headlines. So this is obviously about during World War II, when the Japanese Americans were reclassified and put into internment camps because they were considered a threat because of Japan, the sovereign nation's involvement in World War II. So I've seen a lot of comments online, mostly screen caps from Twitter from George Takei, where he talks about his time in the internment camps when he was a child. And if you don't know who George Takei is, he's a very famous actor from the very first Star Trek series. He played Lieutenant Sulu. And he has made some very heartbreaking comments about what it was like to be in the Japanese internment camps. It's not something that's taught very much in the school system's history. A lot of times this period tends to be glossed over a lot. But actually, the last time I was at the Holocaust Memorial in my area, they had a special exhibit of the Japanese internment camps, because they were obviously drawing the parallel of it doesn't matter what country it is, if it's an internment camp, it's evil. And, you know, there's no good guys who make internment camps and shuffle people in based on something that they say makes those people different. And it was a really powerful exhibit. I'm so glad I got the opportunity to see it. I learned so much more from that than I think I had, because I don't think I learned anything about it in any of my history classes going through school. So when I saw this book and I read the back of it, and especially because it's such a short novel, to be so powerful in so few pages and to be telling the perspective of 5 different people, this just drew me. So I cannot wait to read When the Emperor Was Divine by Julie Otska. And then continuing on the Japanese theme, I have Japanese Death Poems, which sounds like a great name for a metal band. But this, I was actually browsing through the poetry section. I think I was looking for Walt Whitman, and I never did find actual poetry. I found plays, I found just random things, but I didn't find like the collections of poetry that I was looking for. However, when I saw the spine of Japanese death poems, I was like, what the heck is that? I really want to read it. And so these are written by Zen monks and haiku poets on the verge of death. So I'm going to read the back and then I'm going to flip into it a little bit. So it says, a wonderful introduction to the Japanese tradition of jisei. This volume is crammed with exquisite, spontaneous verse and pithy, often hilarious descriptions of the eccentric and committed monastics who wrote the poems. Although the consciousness of death is in most cultures very much a part of life. Although the consciousness of death Although the consciousness of death is in most cultures very much a part of life, this is perhaps nowhere more true than in Japan, where the approach of death has given rise to a centuries-old tradition of writing jisei, or death poem. Such a poem is often written in the very last moments of the poet's life. Hundreds of Japanese death poems, many with a commentary describing the circumstances of the poet's death, have been translated into English here, the great majority of them for the first time. And it does go on, but so I flipped through and I was like, do I really want a book of haiku poetry of Japanese Zen monks and poets, in the moments before they died? So I flipped it open and I realized that it does have an explanation of who this person was, what were the circumstances of their death. It has the characters for their name. But what really interested me was when you see the poems, they actually have both the Japanese and the English. So, and I kind of wish they actually had the katakana, not the kanji. I can't read kanji, but I wish they had the katakana as well because I could really use some practice with it. But they have the romaji, which is the Romanized characters, and then they have the English translation next to it. And so I stood there, mask on, and book up to my face, and I was reading to myself under my breath to try to see if I still had the flow of reading Japanese out loud. And I was hearing this whispered Japanese poetry, and there was something so soothing about it. I absolutely love to listen to Japanese, the Japanese language being spoken by native speakers. So I'll put on something, even if I can't watch, if it's a show or a book, even if I don't know what exactly is being said, I will just sometimes listen to it. It sounds so beautiful. So this poem in English is, "Till now I thought that death befell the untalented alone. If those with talent too must die, surely they make better manure." Okay. I did not plan on picking this one. And when it says pithy and often hilarious, and I'm like, okay, I get it now. So in Japanese, that would be, "Ima made wa heta ga shinu zo to omoishi ni jouzu mo shineba kuso jouzu kana." And I'm glad for the English translation because I would literally have to look up 99.9% of the words. But I love that I will be able to read this, and I will be able to read this in Japanese and hear it the way it was intended to be heard and to be read. And as I was thinking about it, I was like, this sounds so soothing. "Yoezame no kore ga kono yo no aki no mizu." And I know mizu is water. Yes, autumn waters of this world wake me from my drunkenness. So I was thinking that maybe at some point I will do like a poetry video where, I don't know if it's going to be like totally ASMR. To me, it would be ASMR. But to just read some of this poetry and the English translation just in a very calm, quiet setting. I think that's something I would really, really like to do, and maybe even make a series of it, because this is a chunky little book. So there's a lot of material in here. And I feel like that would be therapeutic for me, just to read and go through this and appreciate it in that way. So I just could not leave the bookstore without Japanese death poems. Okay, we are sort of reaching the end of the haul. The last bag that I have is books that I bought today after a very stressful doctor's appointment, where instead of going to get an ice cream or some french fries, I apparently decided I had to go to the bookstore. And again, it's in a bag, so I do apologize for the noise. And I got 3 books today, and I will start with The Shadow in the Glass, J. Harwood. So I had never heard of this before. I actually saw this the first time I went to the bookstore because it had the, which I will be peeling off, but it had the buy one get one half off sticker, and the cover intrigued me, and it's apparently a retelling of Cinderella. I have never knowingly, consciously, intentionally read a fairy tale retelling, and so I'm interested to see how this will turn out. So the back of it says, "Once upon a time, Ella had wished for more than a life as a lowly maid. Now forced to work hard under the unforgiving, lecherous gaze of the man she once called stepfather, Ella's only refuge is in the books she reads by candlelight, secreted away in the library she isn't permitted to enter. One night, among her beloved books of far-off lands, Ella's wishes are answered. At the stroke of midnight, a fairy godmother makes her an offer that will change her life. 7 wishes, hers to make as she pleases. But each wish comes at a price, and Ella must decide whether it's one she's willing to pay." So this actually sounds like a cross between Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast as far as the library, and almost like Aladdin with the genie, and you get 3 wishes, but watch what you wish for. So I'm going to be interested to see how this one goes. So that is The Shadow in the Glass. So next I bought The Plague. I had seen this book flit around here and there on some of my book reading, my emails that I get about discount books and book websites and things, and as just a very prescient novel. So when I came across this today and I couldn't find Anna Karenina, which is the one that I wanted, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna grab a couple of books and we'll just see how it goes. So when I did pick this one up, I reread the back, which, like I said, I'd seen this on some websites, but the back of it says, "A gripping tale of unrelieved horror, of survival and resilience, and the ways in which humankind confronts death. The Plague is at once a masterfully crafted novel, eloquently understated and epic in scope, and a parable of ageless moral resonance profoundly relevant to our times. In Oran, a coastal town in North Africa, the plague begins as a series of portents unheeded by the people. It gradually becomes an omnipresent reality, obliterating all traces of the past and driving its victims to almost unearthly extremes of suffering, madness, and compassion." So I don't know how I could go 2.5 years through a worldwide pandemic and not pick up The Plague. So that is by Albert Camus. And finally, and this was finally, I was walking out and I saw this book as I was passing the final bookshelf, and it looked a little bit familiar to me, so I ran back over to it, and I'm so glad that I did, because this is Daughter of Molokai by Alan Brennert. So in one of my prior videos, I had reviewed Honolulu by Alan Brennert, which, in that one I had mentioned that I read Honolulu because I had read his first book many years ago, and that was Molokai. So for those of you who don't know, the island of Molokai is in the island of the Hawaii chain, but in the past it was used exclusively as a leper colony, and those who contracted leprosy were sent to live on Molokai. They could not leave, they had absolutely no choice in the matter, and the story followed a girl who was diagnosed with leprosy and had to go to Molokai, and she had to leave her family, she left everything behind, and it was a really fantastic book. And then I read Honolulu by Alan Brennert, and that was done incredibly well. And I did not realize that he had another book, and it was Daughter of Molokai, which I believe is a direct sequel to the original Molokai. I believe this follows, it's been so long since I read that book, but I believe this follows the main character's daughter. So the back says, "Infant Ruth arrives at the Kapiolani home for girls after being taken from her mother Rachel, who is quarantined at the isolated leprosy settlement in Kalaupapa. Ruth is adopted by a loving Japanese couple who moved to California and raise her on a strawberry farm. But during World War II, her world is turned upside down as she and her family face internment. Then, after the war, Ruth receives an unexpected letter. The signature at the bottom reads, Rachel Utagawa. This rich and spellbinding novel tells the story of the relationship between two women who were never expected to meet, much less come to love each other. So I really like Alan Brennert's writing. I really like the voice that he gives to his female characters. So far, all three of his books are the protagonist, the main character, and most of the supporting characters are female characters, and they are written so well fleshed out, so thoroughly, so compassionately, and so authentically. So I'm very, very excited to pick up Daughter of Molokai. This will probably be one of the next books that I read. It did not make it to my TBR list, which I'm keeping in my office to remind me of what I said I was going to read, but this might have to go up there now. So, Daughter of Molokai, Alan Brennert, and with that, we end my huge for me book haul. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that even one of these books has intrigued you, and if you have read any of these books, please, 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 down in the comments below, let me know. Let me know what's interested you. Let me know if any of these are ones that you want to read. If you have read any of them, please let me know your thoughts on them. I cannot wait to get into them, but I also cannot wait to see what other people have thought of them. So give me a shout out in the comments below and let me know what you think. I hope you guys have a wonderful day wherever you are, and thank you so much for joining me. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.